I always say, like, you can be the best athlete in the world, but if you don't have oxygen, you can't run.
Hello and welcome to Startup Kitchen Talks. Again, I am back as your guest host. I'm Andrew Gray, GP at Telia Impact Ventures, and I'm joined by our guest today, Ryan Grant Little. Hello, Ryan.
Hi, Andy.
So Ryan is a serial impact and climate tech founder and investor and all-around good guy. His work focuses on removing animals from the supply chain and reducing climate impact. At age 20, straight out of university, he founded the charity Canada Helps, which has facilitated more than $3 billion of donations to Canadian charities. He has had two different entrepreneurial journeys, both resulting in successful exits. He's a prolific investor, and he brings all of this experience together to coach and mentor startup founders. Most recently, Ryan has mobilized extensive resources in support of Ukraine's resistance against its invasion. And even more recently, Ryan is the host of the enthusiastically and aptly named Another Climate Tech podcast. That was a long introduction because there's so much amazing material for us to unpack there. So thank you for joining us, Ryan.
Such a pleasure to be here, Andy, and also to be in here in person in Prague with you.
Absolutely. And I'm a little bit nervous today because you are a podcast host yourself. I'm guest hosting. So I thought it would be a bit of fun to kind of turn the tables and the host will become the hosted.
All that means is that
So, kicking it off with a little bit about you. So, I want to understand your entrepreneurial journey because when I look at it on LinkedIn, it's a lot of things and I want to understand what kind of threads it together. So, you had this impact unicorn right out of the gate. You had two quite different entrepreneurial journeys. If I'm right, one was in biogas, and then the second was actually parachuting into a SaaS company. So, tell us what's the common thread there? What's kind of guiding this path?
yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's a common thread in in any of this stuff. I guess it's impact. I started my first company, Avenir Internet Solutions, when I was 14. That's in 1995. So going way back, and basically we started by taking like the yellow page ad for a company and putting it on the internet,
Genius.
and then kind of as you can imagine, we were doing that for $50 a pop, and people obviously their very first time, being online.
Mm.
And then it would go from $50 to $500, and then we're doing 5,000. And then our last contract was a $500,000 platform for business e-commerce company or platform for the U.S. energy sector, which had been deregulated at that point. So, in 3 or 4 years, it kind of grew to this big thing. As a teenager, it was, I mean, pretty overwhelming. I used to go from school to like at the end of the day to the city where our office was. We had 30 people working there at that point. And this is like late 90s, pre-Uber and everything. And we figured out that the cheapest, so this was not like a glory thing, but the cheapest way to get there was with this stretch limousine company. So I used to get picked up by school and taken like in a stretch limousine as a teenager. I mean, it was ridiculous times, right? It was super weird. All of it. When I look back on it, I'm like, what the hell was I doing? Like, it seems very, very weird. But that went pretty well. We sold that company just before kind of the bubble burst in 2000. And then I did, it wasn't back then, some of these exits weren't, it's not the numbers that we're talking about today. But I made either the best or worst decision of my life, and I gave it all away. And I funded Canada Helps, which is a public foundation in Canada, with the first money. And then, we grew that. I operated it while going to university at the same time for a few years. And then I was on the board of it until 2010 when I moved to Europe. So I started as kind of like an internet guy. I never knew how to code, but I saw the opportunities there, and I saw how this was changing things. And then saw, of course, that the nonprofit sector, where there's no item being shipped, is actually the best use of e-commerce technology, right? So with that, I mean, I'm pretty sure that we invented the PDF receipt. That we were the first ones to do that. I can't verify that, but I remember being told that many years ago. And that got me hooked on impact. So seeing that, and especially kind of the picks and shovels of impact. So I've rarely been kind of the person who's working frontline, for a specific cause within a specific organization, but I've always found ways to use tools and technology, and knowledge to help the helpers, so to speak, right? And so that's what we were doing with Canada Helps, and making it possible for every charity in the country to receive donations online. Basically, built a payments company around it, right?
Mm.
Which probably we should have commercialized back in 2000, but did not. Then from there, there was a case at a business school about Canada Helps, and eventually they asked me. They said, why don't you actually come here and like do an MBA here?" And I thought, okay, like sounds like fun. So I did that, and then out of that, I decided I wanted to get involved in renewable energy, and that's how I got into the biogas space, and so keeping with the impact and more kind of going into the environmental side, which is kind of a passion of mine.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's amazing. It looks like everything you kind of worked on was relatively successful. And that's almost not the case with most of the founders that we're working with. That often they have a few stumbles and, something maybe didn't work out. And I guess when you have this energy, like what's making you decide how you can direct it? How do you know that one job is done, that this is where you want to put the next effort in when the scope is so wide?
Well, I do have a bunch of stumbles throughout there as well. I just don't always have room to
Fit them
to
in the
talk
LinkedIn.
about them, and lots of things where I'll seed something for 6 months and try it out, and see that it's got no legs, and stuff like that. So, that type of thing. I had a big blow up, and when I first moved to Berlin in 2010, I looked at an hour outside of Berlin in Brandenburg, and saw that I had the license to a technology to turn plastic waste into industrial wax, and that would be used in like landing strips at airports and
Okay.
and things like this. So the European rights for this, and decided that I'd go ahead and build a pilot plant with this. And I looked at East Germany and said, "Oh, the unemployment in this region is 30%. People must be dying to get jobs." And they've
Makes
got a
sense.
history. They've got a history of in the DDR of a chemical industry. So there will be people who are qualified for this and stuff like that. And everything that could go wrong did go wrong. The only thing that didn't go wrong is we had like basically an explosion of the pressure vessel exploded and fully melted my chair, and I was off that day.
Wow.
So it's
Nobody heard?
nobody was hurt, but I was literally that I took that one day off, and went like to the lake or something, and my chair, like all the fabric had melted off from it
Wow.
sitting next to the pressure vessel. So believe me, all this to say, it's not been a straight line. A lot of the things that I've been very successful with have made a lot of wealth, for like public wealth or for
Mm,
other people and stuff like that. It's not also that I've my as you mentioned in the intro, my unicorn has been a nonprofit. So
mm.
for me, it's been about really about maximizing impact.
Okay. So then if I'm an aspiring founder or a founder on their journey, and I'm also trying to thread together some common thread, like what are some of the learnings that you think you have from that experience of going from, these semi-connected things and ending up relatively successful? What can we take from that?
Yeah, I mean, so the trick with the threads is that like these narratives always make sense in retrospect,
Mm,
right? So when you look backwards, you can kind of paint it together and you find the narrative afterwards.
mm,
I don't think, anyone who's got here's my plan for the next 10 years, the first thing you can say to them is it's not going to work out like that, right? It rarely works out like that. You might have like I have preferences, but not plans. I have things that am interested in doing and threads that I'll follow, but I can't say like I'm just going to be this and this is how it's going to work out, right? So I think what's important, especially in this day and age of kind of like being able to present yourself and present this thread,
mm.
and when you're raising money or you're getting a job, people want to see this kind of thread.
Yeah.
So it's about being mindful and looking back on it, and really trying to figure this out, and like maybe asking some other people who are good at storytelling to look at this. But it's an effort of curation as well, right? So like you're going to be, like, look, what is the red line through that? What is my passion? Like, oh, maybe it's actually, so I'm working in all these different industries, but it's like an operational expertise that I have that really is the thing, and it's a passion for operations that you can pull through.
Mm.
So you have to create the red line, right? It's not the red thread. It's not really. It's not there. You have to find it.
Yeah, yeah. I think my career path follows a pretty similar
Most do, right?
you know retrospective rewriting of the narrative.
But it's not rewriting, right? The narrative's there, but it's so much of it is like how are you going to write it, right? I mean,
Sure.
so much it's editing, it's not rewriting, and it's about choosing what you're actually going to talk about.
Sure, sure. Okay, and then you switched into investing at some stage, and I was reading through your history, and there's an almost kind of Cambrian explosion of entries where it goes from a little to many, 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 and I was just blown away at how prolific you've been. Almost since COVID was around the area where you started to become very active. What drove you to go from okay, I like building stuff to the other side of I like supporting people to build stuff?
So in 2018, I stepped into a SaaS company as CEO and as a shareholder. This was a company that a friend of mine had founded kind of years before. And, I'm not super interested in running B2B SaaS companies that are solving specific kind of like, IT sector problems. What I liked about this is that it was the leader in its category. It was fully bootstrapped. It was profitable. Um, I'd never had that kind of comfort before, right? And I had a good deal with equity. And so what I said to myself is I will put that equity. So once we sell, the goal was to take the company to sale. And once we sell, um, that funding that I get from that, I will put 100% into impact investing. So so that's what happened. We sold it in 2021, and that's why you see this kind of explosion where I came in and became an angel investor, um, and wrote a lot of checks at what looks like the peak of the market
Mm.
for at least for food tech, where I was mostly investing. And I mean, I've learned a lot. It's been a hell of an experience, both good and bad, in the past few years doing that. And so that's, I mean, you become an investor, I guess, by investing. And so that's how I became an investor.
Yeah. Okay. And what guides your investment decision?
I guess, early on, I think I had a really hard time saying no, and I had a
Mm.
really hard time kind of separating the wheat from the chaff. Everything
Mm.
looked good. And I think sometimes, maybe as a founder also, um, I'm not so sure that jury's still out for me if founders make great investors, because I look at deals and I'm like, yeah, 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 like this is what I would do, that's what I would do, but you're not running the company, right? And so um, someone else is,
Mm.
and it's going to be up to them. And you have, especially as an angel, you have very limited control over kind of how the company is going to run. So um, so at first I would get really excited about opportunities. And then I think more and more I get really excited by founders. And because I remember this 1980 Harvard Harvard Business School review article about always bet on the A founders with the or A team with the B idea rather
Mm.
than the B team with the A idea,
Mm.
because the A team will pivot, the B team will flub it,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's really the case. So I'm investing at pre-seed and seed. And at that point, it's really all just about how the founders think, execute, the resilience they have, the values they have, and that type of thing, right? Because they're really in control of this thing. It's like they're driving a speedboat where you can change the direction very easily, much more so than for a giant corporate, which like has many different mechanisms of governance in place to try to keep the path straight.
Absolutely. And just to pick up on a point you said that the jury being out on founders making great investors, I have thought about this a lot in the work that we do. I think, to be a great VC, you need a mix in your team of all levels of experience through the life of a company. You really need to know what good looks like, But this, the earlier that you go, as you say, when things are not really well thought out and you know that the journey is going to change many times, I think that like recognizes like, and founders who may not even be a specialist in the area that they're investing into, actually, when you get early enough into the kind of angel stage, I do think it's a huge advantage in just kind of recognizing each other's potential and talent. We see that a lot.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think what I was missing, and I know some people who are kind of in my position, and they'll have sort of like a junior who's like running, like sort of like an associate or
Oh,
analyst
yeah.
who's running the numbers, and that's sort of like the like good cop, bad cop, because a lot of so if the founder's always like, yeah, like this looks awesome, let's do it, and you need someone to be like, that these numbers don't make sense, or I think they've miscalculated the market size and stuff like that. That's not me, right? And it's I'm paying for it right now, literally.
Okay. Okay. So has the portfolio experienced some hiccups
For
in
sure,
the?
I've had first write-offs already. I
Mm,
mean, one of the challenges is, I mean, I'm still assessing right now, like these days, how much of a how much risk tolerance I have for this in general,
mm,
because like now I'm out of the the founder's seat, but as an angel, you're still going along for the ride. But right now I'm going along for 25 rides,
mm,
right? And so you're like, and you don't have a lot of control over it. So it's, it's challenging, and it's like it can be emotional. And the thing is, and I hope this is I hope this is true and not just in my case. I hope this is a general trend, because I keep telling people this. But you see the losers before you see the winners,
mm,
right? Because a lot of times, the company will get funded and they'll fizzle out after 18 months, and the ones that are doing well are going to sell in 4 years or something like that, right? Like right now, I'm literally in the middle of that period,
mm.
and I have to say, like, part of me is like, maybe I should have just done real estate.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like open heart surgery in the way that if you come in halfway through a startup's life, it just looks like a murder.
Yeah.
So, and you're right. I mean, it's always bad, nothing but bad news. I always joke that after we invest in companies, that you brace yourself, because that's when after that first year of kind of the laundry coming
Here's the
out.
rest of the Google Drive.
Yeah. And so, okay, so you've had this. I think that's amazing that you've had this almost, one cohort or generation of angel investments, and now you're kind of active again, making another. So how has that changed you? Like, what's different about how you're investing now, 3 years later, than your 2021 experience?
Part of it is like there's strength in numbers, right? Like the early ones, I was really just going at my like by myself,
Mm,
and now I have this network of different people. So like I don't really want to lead on a lot of these things. Like what I'm really keen to do, and what I think has worked best lately, especially, is like I'm very good at finding deals, and so what works, like I like to find deals and then introduce them to some other angels and be like, "Hey, I'm interested in this. Do you want to take a look at it?" And then maybe we can share the due diligence. We can kind of split it up, or I'll get their assessment on it kind of
mm,
first, and then before moving forward. So getting kind of like some other opinions, some other work on this. That like there are some angels where like I basically say, whenever you're doing a deal, please let me know, because I know their track record. I know the way they think. I've been through deals with them, especially also where you've been on deals with them where things have been challenging, whether
mm,
it's like hasn't worked out or the deal itself was difficult, and you get to really see kind of like, oh, this is someone who's really values aligned, who really gets it, who's really fair, which is for me like super important, and it's not always the case in investing, right? Some people are looking to get like the bargain basement deal, which is always works out badly.
mm, mm.
Um, so I think that's the main thing is to recognize my limitations, right? It's always dangerous to not know what you don't know, and so I have a very clear inventory of what I don't know.
That is actually one of my key criteria with founders, especially the earlier that you go. If they are able to really elaborate what they don't know, that is a great sign.
Yeah.
It's when we don't know as a fund, when we know that we don't know what we don't know, then it's a problem, and it's usually a reason why we don't invest.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I often ask founders, what won't you do with your
Mm,
company, right? Because it's sometimes it's really important to see what the opportunity set is for the company,
Yeah.
but I also want to hear them say, like, we're not going to try to be like the infrastructure player as well, as the software player on this. And
Yeah.
so to recognize that, that often to me signals that they've thought a lot about kind of what like their geoboxing will be on how they attack the opportunity.
That's actually a great question for impact founders because I always find it's a bit of a relationship and you don't know where you're going to end up. You don't know what you're going to go through, but you want to make sure that you kind of, there's philosophical alignment there. So this is one of these good feeling out
Yeah.
questions, especially for us, like you want the company to grow in an impactful direction, not to chase the largest commercial opportunity. And as later investors come on, we want our companies to be a smash hit that tends to attract pure profit oriented, larger traditional investors. And they will try to pull the company in the direction of maximizing
Yeah.
profit. And the only, when you're early and you're a lot smaller on the cap table, the only hedge against that is really your conviction in the founder's
Yeah.
overall like North Star.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if I see a lot of reposts or quoting of Elon Musk, that's usually a red flag for
Total
me.
red flag. Yeah.
That you might get flames for that on the podcast because I know that a lot of people don't feel that way. But for me, like, I don't have a pure like a good screen for this, but one of the if I could invent a narcissism detector, I would love that for founders, right? Because there are a lot in but also in VC, but in the founding community,
Mm.
and I think they can be the most dangerous people because you can't give them feedback and they're always right, right? They don't learn.
A counter to that point, because I've witnessed this from both sides, is when you're in such an uncertain environment and you have to stand up in front of a team of people, and especially kind of when you're entering this valley of death, as you were alluding to earlier in the life of a company, you have to tell people it's going to be okay. And I think the only way to do that, any overly neurotic person would be telling the team everything that's most
Yeah.
likely to go wrong.
Yeah.
99% chance
Yeah.
this is not going to be, we're not going to be around in 3 years. They need to stand up and say everything's going to be fine. And they have to be a little bit self delusional.
Yeah.
So there's like a very fine line between like, overly narcissistic and like, bold, confident,
Yeah.
and unreasonably.
Delusional and stupidly optimistic, I think, is
Yes.
fine, right? But yeah, I often said this. I had a business partner once who was like, all about like transparency, but
Mm.
not in a helpful way. Sometimes it
Yeah.
was more just like,
Being an asshole.
more just no. It wasn't even that. It was just like telling everyone everything that's happening all the time.
Mm.
And I said, look, like your role as an executive here is like you're being paid to hold that information and hold that stress, until we can do something with it, right? So until it's like actionable, you shouldn't be putting it on other people's kind of laps, right, to deal
Yes.
with.
Yes. Completely agree. So, changing tack now a little, you host a climate tech podcast called Another Climate Tech Podcast. Love the name. And a little bit of a shout out there. If anyone wants to listen to that, I think a fantastic entry point is the most recent episode at the time of us recording this is with Kitu from Neo Tribe Ventures. Fantastic episode. And it gives me this idea that you are a kind of aggregator of knowledge for climate tech. And I'd love to tap into what you have learned from speaking to all of these great climate tech innovators. So, where are we in this overall fight against stopping our planet warming up and doing something about the after effects of that?
Yeah, I mean that's a big question. And if I go back to when I got into renewable energy in like 2005, I kind of imagine that like this is a technological problem. Global warming's happening. This is a technological problem that we're all kind of on the same side of like fighting, right? As a society, as the world. And this is,
Mm.
maybe this is like when I don't know, Independence Day, the movie came out, and it's like the world versus the aliens and
Mm.
stuff like that. And now it's a reverse for me, where I think the technology is there, and the problem is us,
Mm.
right? And so when I talk to students, I often ask the room. I said, "Would you believe that more people believe that the world is flat today than 100 years ago?" And do like a show of hands and stuff
Mm.
like that. And the truth is, I don't know if that's true. but the fact, I don't know if it's true or not, but the fact that we even have to like ask that question now, 10 years ago, we wouldn't ask that question,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
things are getting weirder, like things
Mm,
are getting super
mm,
weird. And so I actually think that like from a technology standpoint, we have so many different solutions that we can implement. And it's like it takes coordination, it takes money, it takes time, it takes like creativity, but we all kind of have to get behind it, right? And I don't see that, and that's my biggest concern right now. So just like, um, so when I do these on the podcast, it's the reason I set up the podcast is because, as you can imagine, as an investor, as a consultant, as someone who's involved in this space, I get to talk every week with these people who are doing incredible things,
mm,
and nobody's telling their stories,
mm.
right? So they're like literally doing stuff that could save the world, and that's not on the Joe Rogan experience or something like that, right? And so and although I don't get the same numbers on my podcast, I wanted to tell those stories and get and surface that. And so I guess my drive for this is I don't know if it's so much as an aggregator of knowledge as much as like a surfacer of knowledge and a connector of people, right? So as people, I've heard from a lot of people that they've gotten jobs through the podcast. They've definitely a lot of investment has happened through it. Um, these types of things, right? And so
Mm.
for me, that's really valuable, and just like bringing people together in this maybe virtual space, and just like I mean, and also it's been amazing to just be able to hear these stories and be inspired myself, right?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask is, the deeper you get, I think initially you have the kind of shock period where you get where you start to understand how bad the issues are around climate change. And then well, my personal experience, you get to this kind of techno optimism where you think, oh, wow, we can actually solve some of these problems and maybe everything is going to be okay. But it has this massive Dunning-Kruger effect. And I wonder, like, where are you on that journey?
Oh
Like, are
man,
you are you optimistic? Are you depressed?
I'm so far. Like, I mean, I was when I was a preteen, I was an insomniac because I was so worried about climate change back then. So that's like early '90s.
Mm,
Um, that never really went away. I tried drinking for a long time,
okay, drink away the climate.
like uh, uh,
It,
pints and laughs and stuff like that. Um, doesn't work. Also, techno optimism. I mean, I've never been a major techno optimist.
uh-huh.
Like it's always there's the person behind the machine and stuff
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that. But I'm not. I don't know if depressed would be the right word for it, but concerned. And just like I just fundamentally don't understand a lot of this stuff. So I don't understand like people who are climate change contrarians, right? Like I don't understand why you would get paid to do that, or why
Mm,
like and it's not this isn't like me trying to look from off my high horse and stuff like that, but I just literally don't understand it because it's not us versus them. Like we're literally all on the same planet, right?
mm.
So
Tragedy of the commons, though.
yeah, it's exactly. So tragedy of the commons, but at like an existential scale.
Mm. Yeah, I mean that is actually quite depressing to listen to. Um,
I have two, or actually three comedians on my another ClimateTech podcast. So
okay.
if you ever want to, and they're comedians about climate change, and I ask them kind of the same questions, and it's like, I mean, in part, like the only way, and for me, it's the same thing. Like the actually, that's maybe my survival mechanism with this is humor. Like you just have to laugh at the kind of absurdity of it all,
Mm,
right? Like there are
mm.
9 million species on the planet, and we, the smartest one, are the only ones who are screwing it up for everyone.
Yeah, and I mean the planet will be here after us, so
Planet will be
we're
here.
screwing ourselves over.
Yeah, it's the other 8,999,999 species that I'm worried about though,
Yes.
because we're gonna take them down with us.
There was a lot of. It interested me when you said that you started out in, like, was it 2008? You said, and investing into this, and that was a really interesting time in clean tech. And actually, I think that word has kind of been banned nowadays. You can't say clean tech because a lot of people have PTSD about this. A lot of government money, a lot of VC money went into funding a lot of mostly renewable energy, but these huge structural projects, and a lot of companies in this space had monstrously high valuations. And then in around 2009, it just went and people lost bucket loads of money. A lot of the technology never really made it into fruition. There were consolidations, startups died, and it was really seen or looked back in retrospect as being a bubble that popped. And what's happening now has the feeling or has a lot of the ingredients of what happened between, say, 2005 and 2009. I feel personally that it's different, but I'd love to hear your opinion on that. Is it different this time?
I don't think it was a bubble back then, so much as, I mean, the causes of the financial crisis of 2008 are, I wouldn't say closely related to clean tech, as we called it
Mm,
at that time, right? It was very stupid financial instruments that nobody understood, that were people were passing along and selling, and subprime mortgages and all these kinds of things that, the whole financial system just completely blew up, right?
mm,
And we'll see that again because all the
sure.
safeguards we put in there have been
Circumvented.
yeah, or year by year pulled back, as tends to happen. So I don't know. I don't really think it was a bubble. I think there was real momentum. There were people who really cared at that time about climate change, and there was real momentum happening. And it was unfortunate that it coincided with a period of like the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, basically.
Mm,
So that's our loss collectively. And lots of things, there's lots of fundamental research that was done then, lots of basic things that we're kind of finding again now.
yeah,
Um, but this stuff usually doesn't happen in a straight line, right? I mean, the internet
yeah,
was a perfect
yeah,
example. Um, in 2000, people said, like, I remember reading articles in Wired of like, well, that was cool, but that was just a fad, right?
yeah,
The internet's gone, it's over.
yeah,
These types of things. So you see it in all kinds of things. Also within climate tech, you'll see it. Hydrogen is like a classic one. Like everyone loves hydrogen, everyone hates hydrogen. Everyone
mm,
loves it, everyone hates it, right? And it serves a purpose, and it's about kind of lining up that right balance of financing innovation, commercialization, and policy, probably, or
yeah,
regulation, and like waiting for that perfect storm to work in a particular region or whatever. And that's what makes it work, right? There's no master planning on all of this stuff, and so we have to. Sometimes the stars align, sometimes they don't, right? So
yeah.
this, I mean, right now, everything could work out with this kind of 2.0 version, or this could crash again, and it'll be 3.0 that works, or 5.0.
Yeah, I mean, timing is everything for that. It's a typical hype cycle, and you just hope that your capital as an investor is, coming in at the right time.
Yeah,
But you know that the road will be paved forward on lost capital from investors, and
exactly.
it's.
Probably a lot of mine.
Yeah.
But and you know what drives me crazy is so I didn't see this before. I probably just didn't notice this before. But it's also that like our media can only do stories of like building up or tearing down,
Uh,
right? So you see this with like alt proteins. It's like, oh, this is the greatest thing in the world, and then front page news, and it's just everything is this is the future, and then Beyond Meat misses its targets, and cultivated meat takes longer than expected. And then they can only do hit job stories,
yeah.
right? And everything's tearing it down. And the truth is always somewhere in the middle, right?
Mm.
It's more mundane than that.
Yeah, it's interesting as an investor, you can really like opportunities open up because of these narratives swinging so far over in each direction.
Hmm.
So, a quick example of that is, last year, The Guardian published this article about nature based solutions and specifically voluntary carbon credits just being nonsense. It's all a
I
scam,
remember
it's
that.
fraudulent. And we looked at that and we thought, is this going to destroy the carbon credit market? And the answer was no, we think it will prevail. And what will have to happen? We will have to look at quality, permanence, additionality. So we then started looking at, okay, well, if the whole investment if most of the investment flavor has shifted away from doing this, then there's probably some really interesting deals to be had in this space. And we actually made one investment into Arbonics, and their whole like theme is around quality. So there, and we invested right at the point when everyone said you're so stupid. And time will tell how the market recovers from that. But already this year, there's this Symbiosis collective that's come out with like Meta and Microsoft and Google all committing to buy, seriously large amounts of carbon credits. And to your point, the narrative has now shot back in the other direction.
Hmm.
Oh, it was always a great idea. So absolutely, you have to really carve your own thinking through this hype cycle.
And look at like after the 2008 crisis. I mean, look at the companies that were, that VCs made their mints in after that,
Mm,
2009, 2010. That's like Airbnb, Uber, like all these kinds of companies, right? And it's like that's when money wasn't available,
mm,
right? And that's when all these unicorns came from. Right now is an amazing time to be an investor, I think.
I believe so. So on that note, what are you excited about? Like, what are the areas that you're looking at now that you're feeling bullish on to deploy your angel
Still
investments?
alt proteins, so
Uh huh.
so I'm still very bullish on that. I think we've seen that like
Mm,
writ large, this kind of boom and bust cycle on that. But the food, our food industry, our food, how we grow and slaughter and harvest and eat our food today makes no sense, right? Just
mm,
from like an efficiency perspective, from all kinds of, everything from pathogen spread to, I don't know, groundwater, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So there's huge room for innovation there, right? I mean, innovation happens where there's massive inefficiency in a sector, and food sector remains that way. It's the least sexy of the spaces for like people who, especially the kind of tech VC companies that have shifted into climate. They want the like, what's the next Tesla, or like, what's
mm.
the the vertical takeoff Ubers and stuff like that. But actually, I mean, if you want to look at the fundamentals, I mean, food everybody eats, right? Um, it's contributes like one third. The food sector contributes one third to CO2, and it gets like 12% of the
Mm.
investment of climate tech. So I think there's a huge opportunity there, huge inefficiency. So I'm still very bullish on that. Um, and then beyond that, um, I would say um, anything like microalgae and mycelium.
Mhm,
So these sort of like nature-based wonder products that can be everything from biofuels to food to materials.
mm,
I think we're just scratching the surface on
mm.
that, and I think like the stuff like the way mycelium and microalgae will be in our lives between now and the next 10 years will be much more visible.
Yeah, yeah. One observation when you start talking about, we're just scratching the surface. This is grounded in research, and a lot of the, ground pushing the frontier of this is actually happening first in academia. A discovery is then being made about a new property or something that can be synthesized, and then it's coming into commercialization. And is it your observation that the frontiers of climate tech, like really the cutting edge stuff, is actually starting to become almost deep tech? It's kind of converging
Yeah.
with deep tech.
Yeah, I mean, so much of this stuff requires like massive steel vats and these types of things, and there's a lot of hardware investment that's necessary here. There's a split right now, I would say, in the VC community. There are some VCs that really, really understand this stuff and are like figuring out how to, invest in this. It's all about financing, right? The science is
Mm,
understood. The financing is the thing that will screw it up or make it work, right? To a large extent. And a lot of these companies on the hardware side in climate tech don't have like the CFO is kind of an afterthought, and that's the person they really need in there to figure this stuff out. So I think yes, this is happening, and there's a kind of a split, and like there are um, some VCs out there that really really understand this and are really kind of leading with this, and then there are a bunch that especially come from the software world that are going to take some time to catch up and have to learn a new way of financing.
yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of that is really, for me, it's about collaboration between different parties. You need much better tech transfer out of universities. You need, concessional financing or
Yes.
grant financing at the very beginning of a company's life, because a lot of these things, if it's hardware or if it's has a long commercialization cycle, lots of research, it's not producing much in the first 4 or 5 years, which is a traditional
Yeah.
investor holding period for these fast growing companies. So, in order to actually get these through their life, I think the type of capital that these companies need now is just looking so different,
Yeah.
which means it requires a lot of different people to come together. And actually, this is what I like about climate tech in general. It's this nexus of, I think, almost compared to any other vertical within investing, from our world, from VC, it's really the nexus of so many different types of people, and it's
Hmm.
awesome to be part of almost a movement rather than just deploying capital, let's say. So okay, it's not happening. You said people are the problem. I mean, I tend to agree with in any situation, people are generally the problem. But like, what are the specific bottlenecks? Like, what are the things that need to be changed in order to kind of enable better innovation in climate tech?
I mean, I would say so money, and I would say, I mean, money. That's an easy one, right? But
Mm,
you could you could usually use more money. Blended finance, the way you've kind of described it there, I think is like so smart money,
mm,
and people coming in different types of money coming in at different stages and different ways. Those are bottlenecks for sure. Um, there are investors saying right now, like, okay, well, if I put, what's the next step right now? If I put money into this company, like, what's your follow-on financing plan? And
yep.
after a few years of drought, it's nerve-wracking because you don't know, right? There aren't a lot of guarantees on that. Although I think it's loosening up quite a bit. Um, I don't know if I'd call this a bottleneck as much. I don't know, but like smart policy.
Mm,
Um, we really need carrots and sticks, right, to incentivize this for everyone from investors down to consumers to make this transition happen. And it's not, they're great. Here's 500 euros to replace your boiler, like, and this and that. But we really need this at like the macro
oh yeah.
level, like our lives depend on it because they do.
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the big like things now is the slowdown in climate financing as the companies are getting sort of from that Series A stage, going from seed to Series A, and it's a bit of a desert out there for hardware, maybe less hardware. I know, especially for biotech,
Yeah.
for food, alternative proteins and innovation in food, it's pretty rough. And it has this awful cyclical effect because if I'm an earlier stage VC and I know that it's going to be difficult for my companies to raise a little bit further down the road, then I'm probably going to wait until that recovers because I don't want to invest my capital and then know that there's going to be no follow-on
Yep.
investors. And this works all the way down and it actually starts to like dry up innovation at its core. And we are, actively trying to basically invest against that to try to be the
Great.
change a little bit on that one.
Thank you.
And I think it is recovering. I'm starting to get really positive about the momentum that's picking back up. But this whole downturn in venture capital, I guess you've seen this because you've seen it in your portfolio. But it was scary for a bit, or it is scary.
Yeah, it is, and I mean, like in some ways, there was a lot when interest rates are zero.
Mm,
A lot of dumb money goes into a lot of dumb ideas, right? And so it's fine that those shake out. But what happens as well is that a lot of really good companies are failing alongside, and it's just because they're lacking the capital, right?
yep,
And so like it's the onus is on us as investors to be able to spot the difference, I
yep,
think,
yep,
and to work hard to keep the good ones like alive. And so in some cases, as you've seen for sure, the past couple of years, it's been like the advice I've given a bunch of my investees is like just survive right now,
mm,
right? Like you haven't done anything wrong. There's just no money out there
yep.
anymore. And I agree with you. And I've been saying for a while, I think like the end of this year, money starts to open up much more.
Yeah, no, it's a great failure of the whole innovation ecosystem when a company which has a great idea with great commercial potential dies not because they didn't hit their milestones or because they didn't perform, but rather because the financing just wasn't there
Yeah.
to match it.
Yeah, I always say like you can be the best athlete in the world, but if you don't have oxygen, you can't run.
So you're working with a lot of founders in an advisory position now, and they're facing this slightly daunting market, but amazing opportunities in the problem space. What are you telling them? How are you helping them?
I use pitch training as like the Trojan horse. So I say
Okay.
like I'll help you with your pitch, or I get hired by accelerators to help with pitch training, and that's the way because if you see a 5-minute pitch, you can usually zero in on where they really need the help. Right? It's usually not with slides. And so I'll dive in and really focus on kind of one of the areas. The easiest thing is to really get people focused on the customer, right? Like who's really going to pay for it? Like why are they going to? Why is it important? Why is it more important than just not doing the thing? You
Mm.
know, like inertia is often your major competitor, right? That's like I tell SaaS companies all the time, like your biggest competitor is Excel. So like asking some really fundamental questions like this that they might not have been, asking themselves or been asked before, and diving in on that and make so I like to make sure that there's really a commercial story there, right? And focus that, bring that to the front. Talk about like traction, talk about like why their customers are why this is such a big problem for their customers. So that's kind of one of the things that I tend to focus on quite a bit. I also give, someone asked me a while ago, do you ever tell a founder that they shouldn't be a founder?
Mm.
And I said yes. And sometimes I see really early stage founders who are doing this so that maybe they've got a good idea, maybe not, but they're doing this because they want to be their own boss and have freedom. And especially in Europe, if you want to have freedom, go get a job, right? And
Mm.
like you'll get your like 8 weeks of vacation or whatever it is, and you're scratching your throat that day. You're sick for a week, like you don't like it, quit, right? You have so much freedom in Europe as an employee. Where you don't have freedom is as a founder, right? And you start a company and you get venture backed and you have all kinds of other people's money, and so maybe you've got like a mission that you want to follow, but like you don't say goodbye to personal freedom for a number of years.
That's super interesting, that contrast. Because I wanted to ask, both you and I are kind of expats, immigrants into the CEE region, which has been very kind to us and welcomed us. But also, it gives you a different lens, I think, with which to look at the current ecosystem, see what things you like from other places that can be brought in. How do you see it? Like, how are we doing enough for innovation here? What can be improved? And how do you compare it to the different environments that you've worked in?
I mean, I think we're doing a lot for innovation. I mean, I live in Austria right now for the moment, and there's tons of money there, right? There's more money than opportunity.
Mm.
So, and I think if I look at other countries, especially, Germany does this well, Switzerland, Denmark, like there's lots of money for great innovation. Um, there, the, these countries, I think, have been kind of later at this round of entrepreneurship. I mean, entrepreneurship in Europe happened to a large extent like 150 years ago, right? Like if you look at like Bosch and
Mm.
companies like that.
Yeah.
And I think this kind of round started later, right? That in especially with like the internet stuff happened kind of post 2010, or like rocket internet in Berlin. These kinds of things were like late aughts and 2000s. And so some of the kind of like hustle culture came with that as well. But I still feel like I see a lot in Europe. It's country by country as well, but I see a lot of like treating startups as a job, and it's not,
Mm.
right? A startup
Mm.
is a lifestyle, and it's an unhealthy lifestyle that's like putting a huge amount of stress on yourself, right? And it's an unsustainable over the long term lifestyle, probably, right? And so I see a lot of people who like they come into it and they're like they still want to keep their 8 weeks vacation. They still want to do these kinds of things, and like if they can pull it off, all the power to them. And some can, but most can't, right? Because the odds are so stacked against you from the starting point when you have a startup, that kind of any little give like that is going to make the odds even more stacked against you.
Mm. Mm.
So I mean, when I left Canada, when I left Toronto, running the biogas company, I remember thinking, sitting in the office one day on a Sunday and thinking, I haven't had a day off in 6 months. And by a day off, I mean weekday or like weekends as well, right? And so I was working like 16-hour days during the week and like 10 hours on Saturday and Sunday
Mm.
each, right? And that was just normal. You didn't question it. Vacation, like forget about it. Like just not a thing. And to some extent, I do think that, like, if you're really trying to raise this barn, sometimes that is like what's necessary. And I have a very hard time, like, telling people that they should do that,
Mm,
right?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, especially if the culture on the other side, the normal work culture is a bit different as well. But on the other hand, I don't want to scare people away from innovation. I don't want to like
But
gatekeep.
you won't, right? I don't think by saying one of these kinds of things, like something like this, it's ever going to scare people away from innovation. Like the people who have what it takes to make something happen are going to
Yeah.
push through. The people we're scaring away maybe with that are the ones who are like, I mean, the ones who need to hear that, frankly.
Mm, mm. But no, I guess I mean more on the hires number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 20, which I felt are actually the most important for the company. That they buy into the journey, that they want to go on it, even though they're not necessarily a highly equitied founder. Those people, are the real heroes. I think that
Hmm.
are underneath a lot of founders. Okay, so if I'm someone listening to this, I think most of the listeners of this podcast, some are already working in the startup scene. A lot of them are kind of tech curious and maybe even climate curious. Do you have some message for them, some advice for them?
I mean, the main advice I'd have is like work in this space. It's the only thing that matters right now. And, like I love culture, I love music, but I'm not going to like, pay for piano lessons while the house is on fire, right? It's like that's kind of how I think about these things. Like nothing else matters right now except, and I could say disinformation. This is super important, fighting
Mm,
disinformation.
mm,
But it all leads back to, probably because our house is on fire, right? So these things are all connected. Do something that matters in saving the planet, or the planet as we know it. Um, and I mean, I feel like I've been radicalized in the past several years, um, because I find like I just get so bored when people are talking about like, oh, like I do this, and it's not connected at all to like this urgent problem we have
mm.
right now. I'm like, why are you doing that? Like, oh, the pay is good, blah, blah, blah. Like, yeah, but don't you understand?
Yeah, I mean, it must be mentally taxing for you to wear that burden on behalf of others. But
I'm trying to do some things about this because I realize, I mean, this is maybe a form of narcissism as well, because I feel like I have this the only two things that I do right now are like the war in Ukraine and climate climate change. And if, by it does feel like it's all on my shoulders, and of course it's not. And of course I'm not going to be the determining factor in either of those
mm,
things. Um but yeah, it feels like um I'm trying to remind myself that like this is, this is just the world and how it is. And I'm just trying to play. I'm just one bit player in it.
no, I deeply admire that, and you're almost like a walking offset of other people in this world. So, obligatory last question because we're in the startup kitchen, and it is hot in the kitchen for the listeners. We're recording this in the end of summer, and we are in a small sauna, or that's how it feels like. So, speaking of cooking, what is the weirdest food that you've ever eaten? Especially being a person who doesn't eat meat, I'm thinking, is there a story there? You just ate something and thought, nah.
No, it's I was it was in biogas you spend a lot of time in slaughterhouses because that's where most of the stuff comes from. And,
Mm,
and it was after my first I spent hundreds of hours at the biggest slaughterhouses in the world, and I never ate meat again after that. So yeah, so my story won't be one about eating monkeys' brains, like or whatever, if that's one you've had before. But speaking of hot, for me, like this isn't the weirdest thing, but I'm a chili head, so
okay.
I love spicy food. I order chilies on the internet, and I grow. Not right now, but I used to grow them myself. And so maybe this isn't the weirdest thing that I've eaten, but the maybe funniest experience I've had with this is I was at a Thai restaurant in London, and I kept ordering. I was like, make it as spicy as you possibly can, and then
Mm,
bring like a whole bunch of fresh chilies on the side or whatever. And they were looking at me like, no. I'm like, yes, no, really. And then the chef came out and he's like, I want to watch you eat it. He's like, I don't believe you. And I ate it. And so it's, since I've moved to Europe, my spice tolerance de facto has come down a little bit from, if you live in London or Toronto or Mexico City, you are exposed to it a little bit more.
That does not surprise me at all. You're a masochist, right? The same person who's fighting climate tech, who's fighting an invasion in Ukraine. Of course, they're eating spicy food. You probably only watch scary movies. That's a good note to leave it. So thank you, Ryan, so much for joining us. Thanks for shedding some light on climate tech investing, on your personal journey. Where can we follow you and learn more?
ClimateTechPod.com is where the podcast lives, and I'm pretty active on LinkedIn.
Brilliant. So thank you and goodbye.
Thanks a lot, Andy. Great to be here.
Thanks.